anyone that watches anime, is it just me, or has anime quite literally ruined the expectations of regular TV shows and regular movies for anyone else?
I don't know what it is. I feel like the stories are better. Everything's better. They take more risks. They develop more things. It's just better in general.
Hey, call me a degenerate, call me a loser, but if someone tells me to watch a show and it's not an anime,
I'm not watching it.
I'm sorry, I'm not watching it. I don't do that real life stuff. Anime only, brother.
As anime becomes more and more mainstream, I've begun to hear this opinion quite frequently. A lot of people, whether they've only just gotten into anime in recent years or have been fans all their life, seem to have trouble going back to quote-unquote normal TV and movies. You know, more mainstream Western live-action films and shows. Some even making the claim that they're unable to watch anything that is an anime. Now, I have my own perspective on this, and while it's never been so extreme that I cannot enjoy anything that isn't anime, I will say that ever since I really got into it in high school, it has been much more rare for a non-anime show or movie to catch my attention. I feel like anime kind of rewrote my brain chemistry to where now it has a chokehold over my interests, especially in more recent years. And when I hear what these other people are saying, I totally get where they're coming from. With that said though, why is that exactly? What is it about anime that makes it to where these certain kinds of fans don't really want to partake in anything else? What exactly is their perspective? Well, if we're to just look at the modern day entertainment industry, I think one of the most obvious reasons for this is a lot of people are losing their faith in Hollywood. Now, that's not to say that this applies to every Western production. I mean, Obsession came out earlier this year to very high praise, and Spider-Man just made like $2 billion at the box office or something. But for a number of years now, people have become disillusioned with the Hollywood machine when disappointment after disappointment has been coming out. And with Hollywood seemingly on the decline and anime on the biggest high it's ever been on, naturally people are going to start flocking to anime. Like, I still find it so hard to believe, but Demon Slayer Infinity Castle straight up outgrossed both Superman and Fantastic Four at the global box office last year, with over $793 million on a $20 million budget. That is insane, but this also isn't the only factor. I think another reason people feel this way is because anime is also just a very visually striking medium. In fact, if you want my opinion, other than maybe like video games, I think anime is by far the most visually appealing medium in entertainment. And a lot of this comes down to live action versus animation. For reasons that I'll delve further into later, in the West, an abundance of the biggest and most talked about shows and movies are live action. And this comes with a lot of limitations compared to anime. Like, even with very special effects heavy films, even though the special effects can look amazing, most of the time they still have to look convincing through the lens of our reality. And I think one of the fundamental things that makes anime appealing to so many people is the fact that it isn't barred down by these limitations the same way a live action production is. With animation, you can get away with a lot of wacky stuff. It's easier for our brains to accept because it isn't chained to the reality that we're all experiencing. This means that you can go crazy with how characters move, how they express themselves, heck, even just the way that they look. It opens the door for a lot of creativity that's harder to pull off in live action. And lucky me, we have a direct comparison for this in the abundance of live action anime adaptations. Now, a lot of these aren't Western, but they illustrate the broader point that I'm making. Regardless of the quality, I have almost always found that the characters and the live action versions of these series just look really goofy and cheesy compared to their animated counterparts. And I know a lot of people really love it, but I feel like the live action One Piece exemplifies this to a T. One Piece is known for its absurd character designs and the over-the-top expressions those characters make. And when translated into live action, it just does not hit the same. You either get characters that, at least to me, look utterly ridiculous like Arlong, or you get a character like Alvida, who in the original is this giant imposing woman who towers over Luffy, whereas in the live action version, she's just kinda a lady. But like, look, Luffy is even taller than her. It's just not as visually interesting as the anime. And speaking of interesting, something that I found a lot of people say that they prefer about anime is that to them, it has riskier and more diverse stories. There's a lot of anime that tend to have more out there plots and vary drastically from show to show. That's not to say that there is no homogenization within anime, but the opinion I've seen is that it isn't as homogenized as Western productions. And I think that the limitations of live action also play a part in this. The reason I was alluding to earlier why live action has such a chokehold over Western media, well, one of the biggest reasons is that here, for the longest time, animation has always had the stigma of either being for children or for adult comedy. Of course, there have been exceptions within the modern day, but for the most part, that has been the norm. So with the limitations inherent to live action, as well as the restrictions that are constantly placed on Western animation, there's a limit to the stories you can tell. But in Japan, this isn't really the case. Japanese audiences have always seemed to be more open to an abundance of different kinds of stories for different demographics. This creates a kind of dissonance between Eastern and Western media, which leads us to another, I would say maybe one of the biggest reasons for this broader phenomenon. The cultural difference of East and West. It isn't just animation versus live action, it's the fact that anime kind of exists within its own little cultural bubble. Things that Japan specifically thinks is cool and entertaining, they're going to vary compared to Western cultures. You can see this in the characters they create, the scenarios they think of, and even just the tropes associated with anime. Isekai, shonen battle, mecha, high school, magical girl, slice of life. This creates a very particular ecosystem that anime operates in, and when you've watched enough of it, you grow accustomed to it. And as such, when you jump over to the media of a different culture, it can be weird and alienating. It's like if you snatched a polar bear out of its snowy environment and dropped it in the middle of the Bahamas. The polar bear is going to be very confused, and this can go both ways. I've heard for years how people can't get into anime because it's just so cringy to them. The tropes, the way the characters act, everything. And then on the flip side, I've seen anime onlys that think that Western live action films are cringy. Here, let me give you a personal example. I am a huge Godzilla fan. I've seen all the movies and I'm eagerly awaiting Godzilla Minus Zero at the end of the year. That said, no matter what I try, I cannot get myself to enjoy the American MonsterVerse films. I understand that a ton of people enjoy these movies, and I am very much in the minority here, but they just don't really click with me. And I think that it's the cultural dissonance. The Japanese Godzilla films just feel fundamentally different from the American ones, and I found that it's that Japanese perspective that for me is an essential ingredient in a Godzilla movie. And obviously, that's missing from the American ones. The juxtaposition can just be kind of jarring for some people. That said, I think that culture also plays a part in how Japan writes its stories versus what you see in Western media. Now, there's a whole universe of elements and strategies that go into writing, so listing every little difference would be an astronomical task. However, I've looked around for people's perspectives on these differences and have found a good number of takeaways. From what I've seen, a lot of people feel as though Western films and television tend to lean more toward plot-driven narratives, whereas anime tends to prefer an emotional-based narrative. In the case of the former, it's the idea that a scene has to serve a purpose to the immediate plot and move it forward no matter what. And people feel as though anime isn't as focused on this, more concerned with the way that someone feels as they're watching it. A scene doesn't necessarily have to be important to the greater plot if the viewer walked away from that scene feeling a certain emotion. And this is demonstrated greatly with the term ma. Ma is a Japanese word used to describe negative space. It's the time in between, the pause when there's not really anything happening. This is a word that renowned director Hayao Miyazaki has actually used to describe his films. And I think that's very fitting because his movies give you so much downtime to understand the characters and just be with them while they exist. And this is how a lot of anime is. I mean, there's essentially an entire genre dedicated to it called slice of life. And in recent years, anime like this have become some of my favorites. Now, that's not to say Western media never does this or that Japanese media never has more plot-focused stories. Obviously, none of these are set laws or guidelines, but this is just something that I, as well as many others, have noticed. That these different cultures tend to favor different storytelling structures. And it just gives anime this very distinct feel that's difficult for any of our movies or TV to replicate. And all of this combined is what makes it difficult for certain fans to ever go back. But I want to know what you guys think. How do you feel about this greater topic? And what are some of the differences you've noticed between anime and Western media? Let me know in the comments below. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Every little bit of support helps. And with all that said, take care of yourselves, guys, and I'll see you around.